So these are going to be the 6 most important things that you need to know. Remember, you'll have a chance to choose 4. Don't forget to write down the questions and then take some notes on the things that I say. So the first question is about the helots. I trust you'll want to do this one because I know you're very confident on the helots, and especially that important follow-up, how is it that their presence helped to shape the Spartan lifestyle? So remember that helot is Greek for capture. These were people that they conquered. They were from Messenia, but you don't need to know that. These were people that the Spartans conquered, and remember that they had to redeclare war on them, that the Spartan assembly redeclared war on them every single year so that they could justify continuing to kill them. Remember that one of the ways that they controlled the helots was by the boys in the agoge. Some of them would join the Cryptia, and that was the secret guard, the death squads, the ones who would be sent out during the summer to wander the countryside. They would hide during the daytime, and then at night they would slaughter helots. Recall that the helots, of course, outnumbered the Spartans 7-1. Remember that it was illegal for a Spartan man to do agriculture or farming, that was the province or job of the helots, because the Spartans' responsibility was to always be ready for war at all times. So, the helots turned over about half of their crops every year to the Spartans. Now, because they're going to outnumber the Greeks so much, or they're going to outnumber the Spartans so much, the Spartans kind of live in constant fear. They're always looking over their shoulder. They're living in fear of these helots at some point overthrowing them because there's so many of them. So that was just yet another reason why they had to maintain such strict discipline and such constant preparation for war, because their entire society was built on keeping a huge group of people subject to them and under control. So when we talk about women, we're first going to start with differentiating between Athens and Sparta, and then we'll differentiate even within Athens. But take a look at that image on the left. That's a good image of the idea of women in Athens. Notice that everyone in the image is a woman. We may have a small boy there in the background, which would make sense because he hasn't gone off to school yet. He would do that at the age of 7. But until then, you would have the home being the province of women. Women, in fact, lived on the second floor. They were kept separate. Them and the children were kept separate nearly all the time. They were always at home doing those domestic duties. They did the weaving. They were viewed as property, remember, by their fathers and then later by their husbands. Their job was to raise the children, of course, until the boys went off to school, but they would then raise their daughters for the entire of their lives. Of course, Athenian men went out. They attended these meetings that they had called symposiums. They served in government. They had jobs. In the evenings, they gathered at these mass parties. But the women, on the other hand, were kept at home. They had a lot of restrictions. They weren't able to go out freely. In fact, they only went out when they had someone with them, like a chaperone. Now, Spartan women, on the other hand, we've got this great image of the Spartan women. Remember how I said about their short skirts, how they were criticized for their short skirts? Well, of course, you would need to be wearing a shorter skirt so that you could do all this crazy exercise that the Spartan women are doing, whereas the Athenians, we have in these long sort of gown-like things. Spartan women were respected more. Now, please remember, they were not full citizens. They had no voting rights. We didn't go that crazy in Sparta, but they were allowed to travel freely within the state. Of course, Sparta discouraged people from traveling abroad, but they were able to go around freely. They exercised right alongside men at the gymnasium. They were trained in sports, especially so that they would be very fit, so they could become healthy mothers, because, of course, that's what their purpose was. They lived at home while their husbands were away at war, living in the barracks. You remember that Spartan women were able to own property. So thus they became some of the richest people in Sparta, because as their husbands died, they were able to inherit that property. Now, when we talk about Athenian women who are poor versus wealthy, this is what you should picture when you picture wealthy Athenian women. Women kept at home, women whose husbands provide for them, and their job is just to make sure all of the weaving gets done. But when we're talking about poorer Athenians, they actually coincidentally, or perhaps unexpectedly, these poor Athenian women are actually going to be out and working. Because they can't support their families on just their husband's salary, they may also find themselves working out in the marketplace and selling goods. So in that respect, poor Athenian women had more freedom, but of course, rich Athenian women had more advantages. They weren't forced to work alongside their husbands. There is that image that we have that's come down to us of Pericles. Pericles is, of course, an Athenian general. He was one of the men who was elected repeatedly. He was elected many, many times in his lifetime. He's interesting because he grew up wealthy and powerful. He grew up right outside of Athens to a wealthy and powerful family. But notwithstanding that he was part of the wealthy class, part of the aristocracy, one of his passions was to make sure that citizenship was expanded to the poorer classes. He was one of the people who helped to move the political power in Greece, and especially in Athens, from the few to the many. So remember, it started out being only landowners, and then it was only wealthy people, and then eventually over time it comes to be expanded to all males. So he's responsible for making Greece more democratic and making Athens more democratic. He believed that your talents and how much talent you had for a government should be more important than your social class or where you came from. An idea that I'm sure that Han Wudi would agree with when he created the civil service exam. He allowed lower class people not only to participate, but also to run for public office. And even more importantly, he paid people. He paid people for holding offices, which made it possible for even those who were poor to also do that, which was crucial to expanding democracy. He's the guy you need to associate with the golden age. Remember, the golden age is that time of creativity, of learning, of rebuilding after the Persian War, because he's going to come to power after the Persian War. He's going to support philosophers and artists. He wanted Athens to be the school of Greece. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of competition from Sparta, but from other city-states there might have been. He spent a lot of time, he hired workers to construct new public buildings, that thing we call public works, when the government pays people to create things for the general good. The Parthenon was built under Pericles. And of course, remember, he was one of the ones who, though he was making Athens more democratic, he was crucial in turning the Delian League, which was supposed to be just this kind of defensive alliance where they were all equals. He did a good job of subjugating the other city-states and putting them below Athens and turning them into really just subjects of Athens. So he's kind of credited with helping to create this Athenian empire. He forces those city-states to submit to Athens. He demands that they provide tribute. He even forces them to use Athenian coins. So when we talk about the Persian War, a lot of you had trouble with the causes of the Persian War. Consider that we've got the Persians who are vastly expanding. We've got two empires here, two large powers here who are brushing up against each other. Remember, Athens decides to begin trading because they don't have enough farmland or grain. So as they start to trade and they start to meet each other in the Mediterranean Sea, there's going to be conflict. And the real conflict breaks out because the Persians conquer some of the Greek city-states here in Asia Minor. There used to be Greek city-states in Asia Minor. The Persians are going to conquer some of them, and Athens is going to decide that it wants to insert itself in this, and Athens is going to decide to back up some of these Greek city-states. They're going to help them to try to overthrow the Persians. And in response, the Persians are like, oh no, we can't allow this. You can't be interfering in this. Generally, remember that the Persians were quite merciful. They didn't conquer you and wipe you out. They just expected that you would pay tribute. So the Persians become angry that the Athenians are getting involved, and they're going to invade. Now, just remember the 4 battles, if you would. Here's another acronym for you. I've come up with a number of them, but Mr. T sells pancakes may work for you. You have the Battle of Marathon, and of course that Marathon, that was that first invasion, and the Persians are going to wait in hopes that the Athenians will come out and meet them in open battle, but the Athenians know better than that. So they're going to wait until the Persians have retreated to their ships, and then they're going to attack them there. You have Thermopylae. Thermopylae, remember, where the Greeks they need to hold the Persians off because they are giving the Athenian navy time to regroup. So at Thermopylae, you've got Leonidas and those brave 300 Spartans who, even though they know that they have been betrayed, even though you know that the traitor has taken over or has given the Persians an idea of how they can get around them, the brave Spartans fight to give them, the Athenian navy, enough time to, at the Battle of Salamis, to give the Athenian navy time to regroup and then to win an important defeat of the Persians. Remember, the Athenian ships were smaller and more easily maneuvered. And then, of course, you have your final battle at Plataea, where the Athenians meet the Persians on open ground and they defeat them. And that's kind of the final battle that drives the Persians back. Of course, it doesn't defeat the entire empire, but it does drive the Persians back and ends that immediate threat. The Peloponnesian War, of course, we need to talk about. This is the one that's between Athens and Sparta. You've got the Delian League at the Athens area in orange, and then of course their city-states that are part of their alliance. And then in response to that, because remember the Athenians form the Delian League and they don't invite the Spartans to participate, so the Spartans are going to form their own league, and they're going to call it the Peloponnesian League, because the Peloponnesian League is named after Peloponnesus. So we have the Delian League versus the Peloponnesian League, and they are going to go to war. The most important thing for this, of course, that you can remember, the Athenians are building up this empire, and of course the Spartans are going to feel threatened by it. Of course they're going to see this as aggressive, the fact that they have kind of conquered the other members of their Delian League. They're going to be afraid too. They're going to be afraid of what comes next. So between envy and suspicion and fear, you have two civilizations who are completely different from each other, who don't have any respect for each other in the way they run things. This is a recipe for disaster. So ultimately, the Spartans are going to attack the Athenians. And the Athenians know that they don't stand a chance. The Athenians know they're in danger because there are many more Their Spartans are much more prepared and much more military. So the Athenians are going to make use of their navy. So when the Spartans attempt to invade, or when the Spartans attempt to attack Athens, they're going to retreat within their city. And they may have been able to survive in there for a very, very long time, because you remember they used the long walls to resupply. They used the long walls to move from Plataea, their port, to the city itself, and they used that to resupply so that they could survive the siege. You do remember that there was a disease in Athens in the second year of the war that killed a third of the people, a plague that killed a third of the people, including their leader that had started the Athenian Golden Age, Pericles. But they do manage to survive, and they hold out for another 25 years. You remember that the only reason that the Spartans actually managed to defeat them is that the Spartans, they know they need a navy. They know that if they can defeat the Athenian navy, Athens won't be able to resupply its city anymore, and they'll have to submit. So they make a deal with, of course, what other powers kind of around that we can use? We've got the Persians. So they make a deal with the Persians. They say, we'll give you some of these Greek city-states. Of course, we're going to give you Athens city-states. We'll give you these Greek city-states in Asia Minor if you give us the money we need to build a navy. So this navy, this Spartan navy, defeats the Athenian navy and manages to win then the Peloponnesian War. Of course, they didn't really win, because you know that both city-states were very much weakened by 27 years of war. Huge numbers of people died. Their farms were destroyed. People found themselves without jobs. But even more important than that, this virtually ruins any chance that they're going to work together. Remember that it's only by working together that they managed to defeat the Persians the first time. But by Sparta essentially making a deal with the enemy and betraying Athens, and then they destroy Athens as much as possible. By doing that, they virtually ensure that they'll never be able to work together, which is kind of a big deal, because you know that Alexander the Great up here in Macedon, or Macedonia, is gaining in power and gaining in power, and very soon he is going to create a massive empire, and part of the way he's going to do that is by defeating the Greeks one by one. So their inability to work together is going to really doom them in that respect. Last but certainly not least, we'll talk about a citizen. A citizen is a member of a political community who has rights and responsibilities. Some of the rights that Greek citizens had, they had the right to defend themselves in court. They had the right to own property. They had the right to participate in government. They also had responsibilities, things that they weren't forced to do. And more importantly, they had duties, things that they had to do. And the most important duties, of course, that Greek citizens had, they had to defend their homeland. They had to fight for their polis. That's what they had to act as hoplites, or citizen soldiers. They also had to pay taxes. By paying taxes, they allowed the government to run. And by fighting, they were able to defend their homeland. So those were the two duties of Greek citizens. I asked you what the difference between a subject and a citizen was. A subject is someone who's beneath. A subject is someone who is beneath, who's lesser than, who must do what a king says. We usually associate with the idea of subject with a monarchy or a king, whereas citizens are they're equal, and they are the heart of their government. That's what democracy is all about. Demos, meaning people are ruled by the people. They are the heart of the government. They're not less than anyone else. Certainly they will elect others maybe to be their leaders, but that doesn't make them less than, and that doesn't mean that they have to blindly do anything that their leader says, and that's what a subject has to do. Remember how citizenship changes? I already mentioned this to you once. At first, it's only the landowners. They're the only ones who Greeks believe should have a say in government. It expands then to include more of the wealthy, because the wealthy will push for more power. People like Pericles will continue to expand it to even the lower classes and all men. And then, of course, not in Greece, but over time, we now have the American concept of citizenship, where anyone who is born on American soil or born to parents through birthright citizenship is a citizen and should have a say in government. Right. I can't wait to see how you do on the test. I will see you in class.